Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa yet again. And it's Marvelous Monday. mythical, sugared Monday with a lovely Bryce. So I'm just, yeah. And I know I actually made a cock up in the title. It wasn't his own child's head he kept. It was a whole bunch of other heads. But anyway, we will figure that out as we go along. Hello, Bryce. How are you?
I am so good. I can't wait to talk about this SOB today because y'all, you know, we've done so many deep dives, Shanti. We have talked about very questionable people in our history, but no one is as questionable as Peter the Great. And it just makes me mad that we've been so indoctrinated to venerate these people who were nothing but little shits. Like just were disgusting human beings. So
well, I tell you, I mean, but listen, the one that was particularly bad, who's the one that likes the spike, likes to be on spikes, puts these people on spikes,
Peter
Vlad the Impaler.
Peter impale people too. We're gonna talk about it.
I mean, that's just crazy. No, I mean, it just...
You start learning about these royal families. You think you got problems with your aunts and uncles and your mom and your dad. You ain't got no problems compared to what these people. It was killer.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, you guys, we're building up to doing the whole Anastasia Romanoff conspiracy that everybody's aware of for the Bolshevik Revolution, where people believe that one of the children of Tsar Nicholas II survived. And a lot of people in like the awake community or whatever believe that the Romanovs were the good guys. And, you know, Anastasia was kept alive to save it's junk conspiracy, basically. And basically the whole point of this, I loved your episode that you did with Rocker Mike over the Ukraine. And Rocker Mike said something that's so important. He said, especially for Americans, like we want a good guy and we want a bad guy. But rarely is it the case where there is a good guy and a bad guy. Everything we're looking at is shades of gray. And when it comes to like building up to the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 20th century, we're looking at two bad guys. You know, and I'm not saying with that being said too, every single person, I don't want to judge anybody by their last name. Everybody has their own, is responsible for their own character. But as a whole, the Romanovs were one of the most horrific monarchs, in my opinion. I mean, these people were awful human beings. And that's not saying that Nicholas II is going to be like Peter the Great or some of these other Romanovs or Sophia. But it is saying that this is kind of a pattern we're seeing in these monarch families. And I love Peter's older brother. We talked about him last time we were talking about this family, Fedor. I thought he was great. I loved him. He was the one that was like burning all the Boyers books because he didn't believe people should be granted privileges just by their birth, but by the integrity of their work. So there are some good people that pop up within these royal lines, but for the most part, we're seeing patterns of horrific abuse. And what's interesting about monarchs of the past is that they could do this stuff out in the open. And what are people going to do?
There was no comeuppance for them, right? I mean, they just kind of had, it was the upper class and the lower class, call it, right? There was no middle class in those days. So really, they kind of did what they wanted. Everyone had to bow and scrape to them. They were like these superior beings in their minds anyway, and in everyone else's, you know. I mean, and this is why I love guys like Spartacus. I think we should do a show on Spartacus, the gladiators.
The first ever slave revolt.
I love it. That's actually something we should really do that. I mean, I think Spartacus was a super interesting human being because really at the end of the day, you know, that's kind of like, I think, what we need at this stage anyway in life, don't you think? And I mean, if you just... Yeah.
Well, and people are waiting. That's what cracks me up in this, like, truther world. People are waiting for somebody else to come save you. Whether that's Trump, whether that's Anastasia Romanoff, whether that's Zara. And it's like, that's just handing your power away again. And that's what monarchy and we know, it's interesting because next week we're going to be talking about Catherine the Great, which I was telling Shanti, I've already started my research on her. And, I have a lot of questions too about like every individual's need to survive in this system. And with any type of monarchy, if we look at the law of one, which I really do love their template, any type of pecking order, anytime we say this person is of more value than this person because of a bloodline, whatever, that's the negative polarity. That's negative polarity, right? So on a positive polarity, every human being is of equal value by the sake of their birth, right? And yes, we can have some leaders because they've proven themselves as leaders, but once that absolute power corrupts absolutely becomes apparent, then it's time to shift things around. And
right.
So anytime we're looking at that's what I'm really hoping that doing these deep dives too, not only can we re-look at history as we've been taught, are programmed to believe certain things, but we can also understand the mistakes that we're making now in thinking that someone like Trump is going to save us, or someone like General Flynn is going to save us, or someone like Anastasia is going to save us, or the freaking Palladians are going to swoop down and save us. That is dangerous because that's repeating the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, and then we're going to get swooped up in a spaceship. Your body is your spaceship. I mean, your body, when you activate the Merkaba, or however people pronounce it, Merkaba in your body, that is what elevates you. When your own energy frequency, you're going to be flying around in your own body, literally.
Yeah.
You're going to be transcending everything within your own body, but you've got to raise your frequency and your consciousness to the point where you're going to be able to do that. And that's why, these types of shows that we do are so important, and yet they've got the lowest views. Isn't that interesting?
Because people want scandal. They want to hear someone's going to come save them. They want to point the fingers at other people, say they're the bad guys, we're the good guys. And that just shows you that the harsh reality, Shanti, that most people who think they're awake are not awake. They're not awake.
Yeah, exactly.
They're dead.
Exactly. It's so true what you're saying. And this is why I enjoy these shows that we do here, like the history and stuff, because it really just shows us, have we actually evolved that much? Nope. When we just we go back to the times of Christ or Jesus, right? And the crucifixion at that time. I mean, his own people crucified him, right? Because they could not understand the language he was speaking. Look how many of us in this modern day get crucified because we are talking in this modern day age. Many of us are speaking the same language as what Christ himself spoke, right? So when we start understanding that, and I mean, it's not about, and when Jesus said, lift up your mat and walk, that's exactly what we're saying now. Lift up, pick up your mat, pick up your shite. Let go what you don't need. Take what you need. Get up and walk your talk. That's kind of like in modern day language, what we're being said.
You gotta save yourself. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's no one can do it for you. And I think too, Shanti, people, it's just, we've seen this like explosion of narcissism too over the past few decades. I think social media has a lot to do with that. And I'm like, the audacity of you to think that somebody else is like, people get all mad at Trump, and regardless of whether Trump's a good guy or a bad guy, he's still a man who has his own family to worry about and his own self to worry about. The audacity of you to think that he's going to come save you when he's got to worry about his own family. Save your damn self. Save your damn self. That's the point. That's the Spartacus, right? That's the whole thing is you can't.
Exactly what Spartacus did. It's like, and this is what I love. This is what I love about those the ancient Roman days. Because if you look back at those days, those men, those gladiator men, were obviously they were big and buff and tough and what have you. And and they were very sought after by the royal women, right? Or the women of class, so to speak. They were used as sex slaves. I mean, they were brought in, those gladiators were brought in to actually have sex with those women, right? Because I bet those men of theirs had no idea.
Super sperms. Super.
I mean, but seriously, so they were used as objects of desire as well.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about what that is, what made them attractive was the fact that they actually had to stand up for themselves. They had to be independent.
That's one. I will say, Shanti, you know my boyfriend offline. That's one of the things that for me is very attractive about him is that if stuff goes south, we're gonna be fine. Because he has taken the time to learn how to do things, and he has studied, and he knows, he spent a long time in India too, that it is really internally and externally, it is up to us to do this. And so, and that, yeah, that I can understand why these women would be attracted to these gladiators, because they could actually do stuff. They were alpha, you know, and
they were very alpha, not like their little boy, their little royal prince, whatever kids that were puffing or that were like prancing around in little shoes and jackets and fluffy collars and what have you. You know, these guys were out there. They were the real men of our, and that's exactly, you know, if we take it and we sort of translate it into this day and age, that's exactly what we need today. We need that absolute independence of the male psyche. We need, and not just the male psyche, but it's the male energy as well as the feminine energy. You know, you've got to understand we're counterparts to each other, you know, and it doesn't mean that now the woman's got to grab a sword and chop heads off. Maybe there would be, I mean, if you look at the Nordic woman, that's what they did, right?
Yeah. They went to battle too. Well, I'm going to talk more about that next week too with Catherine the Great, because I've got a very different perspective on Catherine the Great now that I've started the research on her than I did going into studying Catherine the Great, and to look at some of these women, you know, who took these leadership roles, but also within their own femininity too, and you know, it's just very interesting to be able to look back. I think that's the good thing about history too, is we can look at this history that happened, you know, hundreds of years ago, and we're not emotionally tied to it like we're emotionally tied to the stories of today. And so when we're not emotionally tied to something, we can have a more discerning perspective of it, and we can recognize the patterns. Because that's all life is, right? Like when we're on earth, we're working on a set of patterns. Some patterns are good, some patterns are bad. And when we can recognize those patterns, we can start to see the same things playing out in our world today, and start to see where we have bad patterning, where we have bad thoughts. And so, and again, Peter the Great, we've been taught, even if you're not even as an American kid, I was taught that Peter the Great was definitely a ruler to venerate because he did all these amazing things. Well, he didn't do amazing things. He didn't. And it's just like long time ago when we talked about King Solomon. King Solomon, we're taught to venerate him, but literally what Solomon did to his people was horrific. He did to his people the same thing that Biden's doing to us today. He raised their taxes. He stole from them. He exiled anybody who stood up against him. So we have to see where we've been programmed to venerate the bloodlines of those who wish to rule us.
Right, exactly.
And we know that everything is inverted. So when I see something the Great, I'm now going to question that and say, were they really? I mean, Peter the Great's been called the father of the nation because he brought Russia from this backwards, lowly state into the empire it is, into Western, to be a competitor with all these other principalities in Western Europe. But he did not do that because he loved his people. In fact, his people were the ones that really paid the price for this. And so there's some other interesting things too. And you guys, Peter the Great's story is so vast that we did this in 2 parts, and we did take a break and we talked about Son of Sam for a second, and then I was out of town. So if you missed the part 1 where we talked about his sister Sophia, and you want more details on his early childhood, go back and rewatch that here on Aquarius.
Isn't it funny how ugly the chicks were in those days? I mean,
they
really were that ugly, or they're just drawing them to be that ugly.
It was, I mean, listen, I keep like trying to think about things rationally. And I know Russia, like it's freaking cold in Russia, but some of these women definitely have some 5 o'clock shadows going on. And I don't know if it was just so freaking
cold. That's what I'm saying. Do you really think they did, Bryce? Or do you think that's just the way they've been depicted? Because any powerful woman coming from that age is the artist, whoever the artist has drawn them to be real fugly, man. They're seriously fugly.
They are not Playboy pinups. Let's just put it that way. You have to knocking on their door to be the centerfold. You know, I mean, they probably had no landscaping down there. They were probably just
no landing strips.
No toning. No, it's probably like hair under the arms, hair on the legs. You know, definitely they probably smelled so bad. Putrid from not having the hygiene practices that we have today. You know, we're going to talk about that with Catherine the Great as well. And it's so funny because when we see these things reenacted through Hollywood, they always pick the most beautiful actresses and actors to play these people. I'm like, that's not historically accurate. Like, that's not what she looked like.
Well, I hope that maybe they're just depicting the lie, because I think maybe these girls actually were pretty good looking, a lot of them. And they were like kick-ass leaders, but when you're looking at how all the men are being venerated for Peter the Great being the greatest thing, and Ivan the Terrible, and whatever else, you know, and the poor chicks looking like bloody flippin'.
I would love for Hollywood to make a movie of Ivan the Terrible. The fact that he was just like sending his wives to monasteries because they didn't satisfy him sexually cracks me up. Like, what a douchebag, first of all. Second, and the fact that his second wife was like doing some black magic, like, Hollywood, you missed a good story. Like, you missed a real good story here. Like, this is, and not much has changed since switching houses from the Rorik house of Ivan the Great to the Romanov house that we're in now. But yeah, and the thing about it is, you guys, so Peter the Great, if you guys remember from, we'll just do a little tiny recap, but again, all the details are in that first video we did with about Sophia, which is literally this. Before really diving into, now I had a foggy memory of Russian history, but Game of Thrones, the show, when I first thought it was really depicting War of the Roses, which was something that happened over in the UK. Since studying the Romanovs, I realized no, the War of the Roses was like Chutes and Ladders compared to what was happening. It was Care Bears compared to what was happening over in Russia with the Romanovs. This is the real Game of Thrones. This is literally a game of effing thrones. Who's going to sit their fat ass on that throne, right? And so when we talk about Peter the Great, he was never supposed to be czar because he was the first son of the second marriage of Alexei, his father, so Peter's grandfather was Michael, the first ever Romanov. So we're not too far into the Romanov rule, and we've already had some disasters, right? And Sophia, after we go through all these kids that die, we're now left with Ivan, which is Peter's half brother, and Peter being co-czars as children. Ivan is not smart enough. He's got, obviously, I personally believe that Ivan probably had Down syndrome. And the only reason why I believe that is because everybody knew by looking at him that he was not competent enough to rule a nation. Now, I know that the trolls are going to get mad at me for saying that. Listen, I love people with Down syndrome. They're doing amazing things. They're able to do great things. But to rule a nation, let's be realistic, that can't happen. And especially if your nation's vulnerable, you know, your king is the head of the military. And so even though Ivan was older than Peter and was from the first marriage, they needed to have Peter co-czar because he could not do this by himself. Well, of course, they were little boys, so little boys can't rule. So they have to have a regent. So Sophia, the freak show bearded lady Sophia from her picture, if you guys remember, where she had a 5 o'clock shadow, she becomes, for all intents and purposes, she becomes the czar. You guys remember that from last time. And the deal was that once Peter came of age, that Sophia would pass the baton, that Ivan was of age first, but once Peter came of age, she would step back and let the boys totally take over. Of course, she did not do that, though. Now, we do know that Peter did. I don't want to take that, even though I think Peter was a total psychopath, I don't want to take away the fact that what he went through as a child was definitely very traumatic. They say that he did suffer with had tremors a lot as an adult. I believe we can call that PTSD today because his life was on the line. Sophia, we're not talking about the Brady Bunch. We're not talking about the Von Trapp family singers, right? We're talking about a family that's at war with each other, siblings trying to kill other siblings. And so his sister was coming after him to try to let her continue to I don't know what that, anyway. Angel says they probably smell poisonous. Yeah, there are no pesticides in their foods. So they were trying to get Peter removed so that his mother's line, Natalia's line, would not be the Romanov bloodline on the throne. They wanted it through the first wife. So Peter watched in the Moscow revolution. He watched his caretakers, his uncles, murdered in front of him. He was constantly, his life was under threat. So and this was started when he was 10 years old. So I'm not taking that away from him. He definitely went through a lot of trauma. Okay. Now, as he started to get older and he had to challenge Sophia, because Sophia was just going to stay on the throne. And I don't know if you guys remember, he wrote his brother Ivan, because they were separated by Sophia. He wrote his brother Ivan a letter and was like, bro, we look like wussies to the rest of Europe. Our sister is basically telling us what to do. We got to like grow some balls and take our throne back. So at this point, there's a standoff between Sophia and I mean, Ivan's just literally, poor Ivan. He's literally just kind of probably sitting in the corner playing with his toys, right? And it's really Peter and Sophia that are going head to head. And he ends up getting her to relinquish to him and to Ivan, really to him. And she was supposed to go to the monastery. That was the deal. She was going to go live a life in the monastery. So she goes to the monastery. A lot of her supporters are executed. But for all this time, for many years, like 9 years when she's in the monastery, just so you guys know, she is still scheming to take back the throne from Peter. Okay? She's still scheming. So that's kind of where we left off last time. So let's go back and now focus more on Peter and Peter's rise to becoming Peter, the quote unquote great. So just so you guys know, Peter was massive. And this is interesting because we are going to mention later on about speculation that I have about Peter's role in Atlantis and some of the Cassiopean readings, because Peter was like 6'7", 6'8". Now that's tall for today's standards. That was ginormous back then. That if you ever go to like Versailles, the Palace of Versailles in Versailles, right side of Paris, where you can take a tour of where like Louis XVI lived. They show you the beds that these people slept in. These beds are tiny because people were tiny back then. We are much bigger now. Even though we know that there were giants around at some point, we are actually bigger now than our most recent historical ancestors. And for Peter to be 6'7", 6'8", this is a huge, interesting flag to me. I won't call it a red flag, but I'll call it an interesting flag. He had long arms and a massive head. He was extremely hyperactive, which might have a lot to do with his PTSD, that hyperactivity. He towered over his contemporaries. Now, when Peter, if we remember when Sophia was the regent, I swear, guys, now I know that nose itching means you're telling the truth, makes me like really more paying attention to what my nose inches. So we know.
Or you're going to fight with someone. Or you're going to fight with someone.
Oh, really? Well, we're fighting with the cabal, aren't we? And we also get threats from Christians all the time. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, exactly. We had a very dodgy troll. Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Yeah. Anyway, but because Peter, even though Peter, before he took over from Sophia, even though he was technically the czar, he was kind of the outcast, right? Because Ivan lived at the Kremlin with Sophia. Peter and his mom were sent to the country. So Peter would go and rendezvous in what they called the foreign quarters. Now, the foreign quarters was an area of Moscow where you had people who were German, Dutch, weren't Russian. They spoke different languages, and they were all kind of crammed into this corner. And so Peter was very fascinated by Western European culture from a very young age. Now, remember, his mother, Natalia, had a parent who was from Scotland, so he already has this influence coming from his mother, and he's very fascinated by these Westerners. I mean, Russia was so different at this time from Western Europe in the way they lived there culturally, the way they dressed. And so even before this issue comes up with Sophia, he's going and having little tryst in brothels with some. I mean, listen, we see the paintings of the Russian women back then. I don't blame him for going and boinking a few Dutch women or two, because obviously, so trying to make light of that.
I keep telling you, Bryce, it's propaganda against women.
It's propaganda. Well, and I'm not taking away Peter's intelligence. Peter was very, very smart. He was very, very highly intelligent man. He picked up on all these different languages. He learned how to speak multiple different languages besides the traditional languages. And in 1689, which was the same year that Sophia is wants to maintain power, Peter is arranged to marry a woman his mother Natalia sets him up with. And this is a woman named, and I hope I'm saying her name right. Her name, I think it's pronounced Eudoxia. I might be incorrect in that. But Eudoxia was this very, she was very culturally Russian. She was very, and I think his mother was very smart in this regard by pairing Peter with Eudoxia, because Peter had this wandering eye for Western European activities. But the Russian people as a whole, meaning the serfs and the peasants, not the boyars, were very Russian. So seeing a Tsarina, for lack of a better word, that represented them was smart on his mother's part, Natalia. I think Peter got a lot of his intelligence from his mother. And so he's married to this woman. She ends up having a baby the next year, the Grand Duke Alexei Petrovich of Russia on 18th of February, 1690. So all while Peter's battling with his sister, he's getting married and having a child. Now,
18th of February, isn't that, that was yesterday.
Yesterday,
So
yeah, yesterday. And I like his son. We're going to get into his son. So happy birthday to the late Alexei Petrovich of Russia. So when Ivan, if you guys remember from the first section, when Ivan and Peter were co-czars, whose bloodline was going to inherit the throne depended on which of these czars had a son first. Right. So Alexei was Peter's golden ticket. So there was a lot of pressure on this boy at his birth. Now, Eudoxia would end up getting pregnant a couple more times, but all the other kids, they died in infancy. So Alexei was the lone survivor and therefore ensured, and this is before. So Ivan doesn't pass away until 1696. So this is 6 years before Ivan passes away. So now we have established that Peter is the dominant czar. If it wasn't established beforehand because of competency, now we've really established that Peter is the one that's bloodline. So Natalia, through his mother, is going to stay on the throne. That's a lot of pressure to put on a baby. All right. So Sophia, there's a lot of moving parts here, guys. This is like Days of Our Lives. This is As the World Turns. This is a soap opera for today. As Sophia is now in the monastery plotting to take the crown back, Peter is having a wife and a child. He's now even more secured himself. Now, Peter decides in 1697, which is a year after Ivan dies. So now he is the sole czar because all Ivan has was daughters. Peter does something very, very daring. And this is probably what most people remember. This is how I remember learning about Peter the Great. This is the great legacy. Peter decides that he's going to go incognito to Western Europe to study how to make ships because he wants to turn Russia into a big naval army, right? And so we all remember this. He goes incognito. He works because the UK has a great naval, so he goes and works for naval ships in the UK. He goes to Holland. Nobody knows he's the czar. And he does this very brave thing where he leaves his trusted boyars in charge of Russia. Well, Sophia at this time sees this as a time to attack. So while Peter is in Holland, learning how to make a ship with the peasants, Sophia gets her supporters to attack Moscow. to remove Peter's cabinet so she could be put back on the throne. Well, thank God. If you guys remember, well, not thank God for the people, but thank God for Peter. Remember last week we talked about how Peter grew up in the country and he made all these friends with these little boys and they played war all the time and these boys became his greatest supporter and his greatest army. Well, here you go. These boys figured out that Sophia is about to come in and attack with her men, so they cut him off. They cut the army off in New Jerusalem, which is 30 miles outside of Moscow, and they squash it. This is an army of 4,000 men to try to get Sophia back on the throne. 130 were hanged, 140 were whipped and sent to exile, and 1,960 were banished. But that wasn't enough because Peter finds out about it, and Peter is effing pissed. He's pissed. He's been dealing with this horrific, abusive older sister his whole life, and he's gone away to try to learn how to create a navy. So he's got to come back to Russia now. So he comes back to Russia in August of that same year after the attack happened, and he goes full on attack. So he opens up the investigation again into the uprising. He has 2,000 more people executed, 6,000 more flogged and branded. And not only that, but he had Sophia put basically under extreme lock and key in a tower in the monastery, forced her to take the veil, which means now she's got to become a nun. And he took some of the bodies of the men he had executed who supported Sophia and hung them outside of her windows. So all she could see when she looked out the window were bodies. That was it, of these dead men. So we're starting to see some of the...
They loved doing that in that day and age. They were so grotesque, seriously.
Sadistic, absolutely sadistic. So around this time, so Sophia ends up spending her terrific. She dies in 1704 at only 46 years old in the monastery. In 1703, just to point this out, this is when St. Petersburg is founded, which then became Russia's capital. It got moved from Moscow to St. Petersburg. And I like to point out, narcissists all play by the same handbook. We have Constantinople, named after Constantine, Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great, another psychopath we've talked about on this channel. I love how these people like to name cities after themselves. So St. Petersburg, you know, talk about dick swinging, right? Like, talk about lifting your leg and peeing on something, right? You know, yeah. So just going to put that out there. So now we have the capital is now St. Petersburg, which I will say strategically, St. Petersburg is obviously closer to Western Europe. So that does make more sense if you're trying to create alliances with other municipal powers in this area to have a capital closer to these other powers. He also gets, at some point in this decade, he joins the Holy League, which is this kind of alliance between all these different principalities that are fighting against the Turks. Again, as I keep saying, I'm not really interested in military history. I'm going to only talk about military history when it's valuable to the story, to the point of the story. But the point of the story is to talk about what a freaking creep Peter the Great was. So there are great channels out there that do great military history. I'm not one of them. So we do know that he did. We'll talk a little bit about how he built the military power, but just know that there are lots of things militaristically he did that we're not going to talk about today. But one of them was joining the Holy League to push back against the Ottomans, right? All right. So Peter can't stand his wife Eudoxia, which is not uncommon for these royal families. Their marriages are arranged. We know of a lot of marriages in royal families where the wife and the husband can't stand each other, but they're there together to make babies, to strengthen a bloodline, and to create an alliance. So they deal with it. They take lovers, or the man will take lovers, and they'll just produce their heirs, and that's that. Well, he can't stand Eudoxia. He's cruel to his son Alexei. He's very mean to his son Alexei, and he ends up sending Eudoxia to another monastery in 1698, and he officially divorces her. Officially, he divorces Eudoxia, and he takes his son Alexei and her son Alexei and sends Alexei to be raised by Peter's sister, who's also named Natalia after their mother. So Eudoxia, I feel sorry for Eudoxia. She's done nothing wrong. She's just a sweet little Russian girl. She gave him the one thing he needed to secure his throne, which was a son, and this whole time throughout their whole marriage he has treated her horribly. I mean, there's a picture of him that apparently still hangs in Putin's office today of Peter the Great beating Eudoxia. So this woman, God bless her, But anyway, he sends her to a monastery. All right. She goes to
She was probably happy.
Yes. Okay. We're going to get into that. So she gets into the monastery, and I'm not Catholic, so I'm not really sure how all the politics work in monasteries. But from what I understand with this case, the proprietor of the monastery allowed Eudoxia to live at the monastery as a lay person. So she did not take the veil. She was not a nun. She was just an aristocratic woman that was allowed to live there and to carry on a normal social life for a woman. She's divorced at this point. She ends up meeting a man. And he becomes, in our modern terms, she would have been her boyfriend. This man's her boyfriend now. Her lover, they called it a lover then, but boyfriend now. And he's with her for about 9 years. Peter then finds out that Eudoxia has had this boyfriend for 9 years, and he gets so pissed that he decides that he's going to execute the boyfriend. Well, he executes the boyfriend by impaling him, just like Vlad did. And he forces Eudoxia to watch. Why? They're divorced. He didn't want her. She did everything she could that she was contracted to do. She gave him a son. He took her son away from him. He couldn't let her have that boyfriend. He impaled him, which is not an easy way to die. It's a very slow death, and forced Eudoxia to watch. This is very typical of Peter the Great. Now, at this point,
I want the toy, but you can't have my toy either.
Exactly. She's mine. She belongs to me. So we also know that there's starting to become some rumbles within the Russian people. The Russian people, as well as the boyars, don't like Peter. They don't like him. He is a tyrant. And so there's this underground movement where they're calling Eudoxia the sovereign one. And we're going to see this snowball and build up with his son Alexei, because a lot of the people are thinking, okay, if Peter, we can't deal with Peter, so let's take him off the throne and put Alexei on the throne because this guy's a tyrant. He was so tyrannical, guys. In 1698, he also created something called a beard tax, which he's famous for. And I guess in Western Europe, it wasn't common for men to have beards. Beard, yeah, beard tax. So you could not wear a beard unless you were a peasant or in the clergy. If you were an aristocrat or like a normal Joe Schmo and you wanted a beard, you would have to pay a tax of 600 rubles a year. That works out to about $100,000 today just to have a beard. People were forced to wear Western clothes. Western clothing at this time was very different from the traditional Russian Orthodox clothing. And they were forced by draconian measures to change their clothing. Peter bankrupted Russia by taking the silver, the money, and boiling it down and pulling silver out, so it caused massive inflation. He was so tyrannical, he changed the calendar from the original calendar to the Gregorian calendar. He forced the Russians to take on Western holidays and get rid of their Orthodox holidays. It got so bad that two things started to become whispered amongst the people. One, that Peter was the Antichrist. Now, Shanti and I were laughing offline because I would like to see a list of how many people have been labeled the Antichrist, including Shanti and me. But here's the interesting thing about Peter is that I was telling Shanti offline that the Cassiopeians have said before that the reason why Russia is in the news big time right now is because they have a lot of karma, because they were part of the fall of Atlantis. Well, look at Peter's height. So if we're looking at perhaps a different timeline, is there some truth to this? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just thought that was an interesting thing because the boyars didn't like him. The peasants didn't like him. He forced 1 in 20 men in peasantry classes to join the military for a lifetime. They had no choice but to fight for Russia, give their lives for Russia. This man was not great. He was a tyrant. He was horrible.
You know, sorry, I want to just say this. It's very interesting what you're saying because a while back I was interviewing Lera Nikolaev, and she was actually talking about why Russia is so powerful. And not only is it obviously because of the AI technology and AI what have you, but also she was talking about the amount of blood sacrifices that were given over time. And of course, the more blood sacrifices that are given to the dark entities, the more powerful that country or that region becomes. So it would make a lot of sense to me, like, you know, when we're looking at the history, because it doesn't go away, you know. I mean, we know energy can never be created or destroyed, only ever transferred or transformed, right? So it's really just been an accumulation of blood rituals, blood sacrifice. I mean, just the impaling, right? And the killing and the beating and
the terror people lived under.
Yeah. In that way, it makes a lot of sense as to why Russia, in many ways, is so powerful and has been so powerful.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of this.
And this is what we know about. Can you imagine what we don't know about what he did? There was an article I read where he said that some of the beheadings that he would do for his enemies, it was very rare for a king to even be present for an execution, but that Peter himself would swing the sword. Like
he was probably the most bloodthirsty of the lot. That's the thing. They're so bloodthirsty.
The King James Bible, that King James, we've talked about how psychopathic and he was like Peter. He was an open Satanist. He was an open, hurting children, and so that reminded me a lot of King James, because King James liked seeing people be tortured. I have a hard time when I watch historical reenactments of executions. I always fast forward through the execution because I have a hard time watching it. And it's freaking Hollywood. It's not a real execution. And I have a hard time watching it. So this is definitely, something's wrong mentally. There's some screws missing. Now, this is what's the kicker too, guys. And this is when we're talking about in the beginning, learning from the mistakes of our ancestors. The other interesting thing about Peter at this time is that there was a conspiracy that started to be whispered amongst the people, that they believed this was not the real Peter. They believed the real Peter got arrested and was held in captivity when he went to...
Kidding me! Europe. So already we were having doubles and clones and things. Yep. And makes perfect sense.
And I think this actually was the real Peter, because I think his family is just bloodthirsty. And I think that this is just, we're going to see this is just in their genes to do this.
But what I'm saying is, even if it was the real Peter, isn't it interesting that even as far back as then, they're talking about the fact that it wasn't the real Peter, that someone else was doubling up for him or whatever it was.
I mean, think about it now. I think people want to justify why someone's doing what they're doing, and they don't want to take accountability for mistake. For us now, for the Russian people, they didn't have a choice. Like the Game of Thrones, like they had a king. It was a monarchy. But for like us, sometimes we make mistakes. Like, what is the Mark Twain quote? It's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled. And so I think for us, in order to satisfy our own pride and maybe support backing someone that we maybe now realize we shouldn't have backed, we try to create these mental gymnastics to validate. It shows you why junk conspiracy, the term junk conspiracy, is a really important term to keep in the back of your head, and to always use discernment and critically think even with your own thoughts. It's okay to change your opinion. But I thought that was fascinating. Yeah, we're doing the same thing that the Russian people back then were trying to justify. Well, like, think about it this way, Shanti. Look at how the world's falling apart right now. And so many people are like, oh, it's the movie. It's the movie, you guys. When literally the world's falling apart. People are losing their homes. Inflation's up. No, it's not a fucking movie. But that's the junk conspiracy. You're now brainwashed to think, I'm going to now justify why my world's falling apart in a positive way and say, oh, it's the movie. The white hats are in charge. No, they're not. No,
it's time to take responsibility and stand up for yourself.
Exactly.
Pick up your mat and walk your talk. Stand up, arise.
So the same thing was happened back then, where they were saying, oh, this can't possibly be the real Peter. The real Tsar would never do this. This has to be an imposter. The real Peter must be living in captivity in Western Europe. This can't,
because he would never do this. Yeah, he was probably taken over by some low form demonic entity. Seriously, some little bloodluster entity, because that, in my opinion, is what these. I mean, when you're looking back over history and you're seeing again, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you look at the royal families and the elite, so to speak, nowadays, nothing much has changed. They're doing it, except it's done in modern day times with modern day equipment, which is even that much more dangerous. So yes, the world has expanded in its population, but so has their direct energy weapons and all their technology and stuff. It's just become more, we've just become more evolved.
So pattern. It's the same pattern.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Same pattern.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
He also did something which I thought was interesting, because we know about like Tartaria, with what cathedrals originally were, according to the Tartarian stuff, were not churches. Well, at this time, he started to take down church bells, so the big bells that were like probably sound therapy, and melting them into cannonballs to use in war. So that shows me destruction of the Tartarian buildings.
They're like just so disgusting. I mean, really.
When the whole issue happened with Eudoxia, so Peter was also a nymphomaniac, I believe. He was very, he was having sex all the time, like
sex maniac.
Yeah, but he did have his main mistress, which was a woman named Anna Mons, that he was with for 12 years. She was the main mistress. He had other women too.
Hey, I got pictures of these people. Shall I put them up?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot. You do have images of these people. I sent you some. Yes, Anna Mons is the blonde woman. That's Anna Mons. So she's
quite pretty. I mean, look, hey, there's
one. We found one, guys. And then so we have the first wife, Eudoxia. I think I have her picture too. If you guys want to see the first wife, Eudoxia, the one.
We have Catherine. We have Peter, first wife. Okay, there she is.
Yes, that's the first wife. She's a little chubby. You know what? If I had
man, for God's sake, it's like, what the hell? Why do they make the girl so ugly?
I know. Listen. Anna Mons was beautiful, though. He was with Anna Mons for 12 years, although he did have lots of lovers. He even, in one of the sources I read, he actually charged women to sleep with him because he thought,
oh my God, what the hell?
The schlongiest of schlongs. I think men should know schlongs are ugly. They serve one purpose in the moment. That's it. I don't know any woman that wants to get a picture of your schlong. I know no women that want to actually have that. I'd rather see your chest or your face.
Hey, yes, Catherine. Should I put a picture of her?
That's coming. We're going to get to her. That's the next one. So why I bring Anna Mons up is because Anna Mons' brother, Willem, became really good friends with Peter. But Anna Mons, 12 years into a relationship with Peter, cheated on Peter. Now, again, guys, Peter's been cheating on her this whole time. So turnaround's fair play, right? And Anna Mons, she did not suffer the same fate that like other people had. He basically just imprisoned her. She just had to go to prison. That was it.
So she didn't go to a monastery and live a life of why? Because she cheated on him.
Yep. And some accounts say she actually did it to try to make him jealous. So it wasn't even like, I don't know. You know, I could see that happening if you're a woman and your man's like cheating on you like crazy, and your man's also bloodthirsty, and Lord. Anyway, but the only reason why I bring Anna Mons up is because I want you guys to remember her brother, Willem. So Willem became like a secretary to, Willem was not in prison. He was Anna's brother, but he was such good friends with Peter that he stayed along with Peter. At the same time, after that happens, Peter meets a woman. He's introduced to a woman named Marta. Now, Marta, let's see. I'd pay a man for sex if there was a guaranteed refund, no questions asked policy. I like my money back, please.
You're not up to scratch. Hand over, buddy.
That wasn't, your schlong is not the schlongiest of schlongs. So, anyway, so Willem, they find Peter a new mistress. So Peter needs to have like a main mistress, and they find this woman named Marta. Peter becomes so enamored by Marta. Marta's like a house girl, you guys. She doesn't even know how to read or write. That he marries her, and she becomes Catherine the First of Russia. And that you can show her picture, Shanti. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Catherine the First at the end of this episode. She's going to play into our story of Catherine the Great. Listen, Anna Mons was the beauty out of all of them. These double chins, I swear to God.
This is what I'm saying. I'm telling you, this is propaganda against women. There had to have been more attractive women in that day and age, other than the bloodthirsty man's mistress, because every woman looks like a man in drag. And I don't believe
I love how Caleb just wrote sexy parties. I have a feeling, Caleb, you know how, have you ever accidentally wandered onto a nude beach? If you ever accidentally wander onto a nude beach, it's not the pretty people who are naked. It's never the pretty people. It's also not very sexy. It's like the fat, like not in shape old people that are wondering. It's a sight for sore eyes. Like I would sit on a nude beach all day and just gawk because it's not the pretty people. So I have a feeling that's what their little parties were like a nude beach today, like you go to a nude beach. I don't think there was any landscaping going on. I don't think there was any like tweezing and plucking and shaving and waxing. I don't imagine there was any perfume being used. No, probably no sexy lingerie with a bush sticking out of it. I don't, definitely not our timeline, guys. Definitely not our time. I don't know if any of us, if we had to be transported back to that time and live, I don't think any of us would be happy about it. I think we'd be like, oh my God, you guys are so freaking ugly.
It's like we get a
razor. Let me show you what a razor is.
We want to forward travel again.
No. So, but anyway, she becomes Catherine the First of Russia. She takes on a new name, which is going to play into Catherine the Great too. They're not the same person, but it's going to play into her story as well. So Catherine and Peter have a pretty successful marriage for the most part. Okay. She ends up having like 9 kids with him. I mean, I'm telling you guys, Russian women can freaking pop some babies out. Let me just, I don't know what happened to some of us white women who struggle to have babies, but Russian women, like they know how to pop the babies out. So she ends up having, not 9 children, 11 children. I just see my notes here, 11 children. So at the same time, we have Grand Duke Alexei, his son from his first marriage, who is according to law, even though Peter is remarried to Catherine and has sons with Catherine now, Alexei's the firstborn. So he, according to law, is the heir to the throne. And if you remember way back to the beginning of Alexei's birth, he saved the throne for, I would never go back to the natural 70s. Jan, I've been researching some Playboy stuff for a deep dive. I have found some Playboys from the 70s. Like, I just like, I don't know if the hair was bigger here or there, but yeah, it's definitely very different time period. But anyway, Alexei, he's been raised this whole time by his Aunt Natalia. He is heir to the throne, and Alexei hates his father. Alexei thinks his father is a tyrant, along with everybody else. Alexei has openly stated that when he takes the throne of Russia, he's going to take Russia back to the old ways. He's not going to force the policies of his father. Alexei, and that's why I say, even though as a whole the Romanovs are questionable people, there are a few diamonds in the rough. Fedora, his older brother, was one. I think Alexei actually had a soul. I think Alexei was very, very hurt by what his father was doing to the Russian people. He was very aware of how this was affecting the people of Russia, the peasants, us little people. And he made it very clear that he would not continue his father's policies. Well, we also, again, at this time, have a lot of boyars who are not happy with Peter either, probably for more selfish reasons like the beer tax. And so there's been some plots, some coups. People have plotted to remove Peter from the throne by executing him in order to allow Alexei to take over. Well, Alexei gets so fed up with his father and frankly kind of terrified of his father that he defects to Austria. So Alexei runs to Austria and asks for protection from the Emperor of Austria, who is actually his brother-in-law, his wife's father. All right, so he's in Austria. Peter's got to do something to get his son back because this does not look good. This does not look good for Russia as an empire to have the heir apparent running away from an abusive father. So Alexei and Peter start to talk, and Alexei says, "Okay, Dad, listen, I want nothing to do with your political games. I just don't want it. This is not okay with me. If I come back to Russia, I promise you that I will abdicate my role, my place in line for my son, or for anybody of your choosing, Dad. If you let me come back to Russia and just let me live a quiet life, just give me amnesty, let me live a quiet life." And this upsets me because I cannot believe, I mean, I can, but a parent would lie to his child like this. So Peter says, "Okay, son, you can come back to Russia. I'll give you amnesty. I'll let you live a quiet life. You can abdicate your line of power, and I won't hurt you. I won't kill you, I won't hurt you." So they agree. The minute Alexei gets back into Russia, he is arrested for treason. He's put on trial. He's taken to St. Petersburg. While he's in the dungeons, he's being beaten to death. One of his mistresses is also taken in, and she's beaten to death. And under those torture, the torture chambers that they had, they start to give names. Now, historians do believe that even though Alexei's name was brought up by other boyars to replace Peter on the throne, that there is no proof whatsoever that Alexei intended to actually hurt his father. That Alexei would say something like, "Oh my God, I could kill my dad," or "I can't wait for my dad to die." What teenager hasn't said that? What kid hasn't said that? But there is no proof whatsoever that Alexei ever did anything or threatened anything to hurt. Just because people were throwing Alexei's name into the mix because he was the next in line as their savior, as the person that's going to fix everything, is basically how he got into the mess he was in. And so he was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. This is the prince, you guys. So your father has signed your death warrant. You were the child that ensured your father would hold on to the throne. You were, at the beginning of your life, you were more important to your father than your father. You were more important than your father was because you secured your father's mother's line on the throne. And now your father is signing your death warrant. No problem signing his death warrant. And I think I sent a picture of Alexei, the young one. I think he's in red. And Alexei actually didn't make it to
Peter's son, the one that's Peter's son, that one.
Yeah, that's him. That's Alexei. Alexei actually did not make it to his execution. He died in the dungeon from his injuries before his execution. That's how bad he was beaten. And his son, Alexei's son, Peter II, will reign, which we'll get into next week. He will reign for a little bit. And that to me is probably the most, I mean, we're going to get into one last thing with Peter before he passed away. I mean, Peter was such a grotesque sadist who was bloodthirsty, but doing that to your own son, that is something that we don't see often in monarchs. Usually for a narcissist or a psychopath, your children are extensions of you. And even if there's tension between you and your son, we've seen with all the other monarchs, they would never hurt their son. Because there's maybe different story with Henry II over in England, but to actually take this type of brutality out on your child, to lie to your child because all you care about is you, and if your child is still alive, then there is a possibility that the boyars are going to have you assassinated to put your child. How about not be a jackass to your people? That's a way to fix that. How about not bankrupt your people? Peter is literally the walking example of Build Back Better. He did bring Russia in from a backwater state to a rising empire, but he did it through coercion and through abuse and tyranny. He is the Build Back Better of our generation, right? That's who he is. And to kill your own child, that just is horrifying.
Yeah, that's just on another level.
And how scary that must have been for other people in places of power, or even for the peasants and the serfs to be like shocked, like, oh my God, that was the prince. That was the literal prince. So no one's safe. If the prince isn't safe, no one's safe
Yeah.
with Peter. So anyway, dictatorship, draconian dictatorship. So around the age of 44, 3 years older than me, Peter starts having very bad health. He has inflammation of the bowels, kidney stones, swollen liver. I mean, Shanti, like reading about his health issues, I think you and I today, if we had him as a client, we'd be like, we need to unpack all this because this is obviously something going on with your emotions, because it's not pointing to one specific thing. It's a bunch of stuff. Like basically he had irritable bowel, all this stuff. So now, and granted, Peter was very paranoid. He had PTSD from his own childhood. Well, after Alexei was executed, he changed the law that a ruler could put in who he wanted to inherit the throne. Because after Alexei died, Peter did not want his grandson, who was named after him, Peter II, to take the throne. He did not want Alexei's son on the throne because he was pissed at Alexei, even though he just killed Alexei. Peter II will eventually take the throne, which we'll talk about next week. But he made it so that his wife, Catherine, or Marta, would become empress upon his death. And this is very interesting to me. And I would love to know the psychology behind Peter doing this, because obviously Peter does not believe that women are equal to men when it comes to intellect. He's got a lot of trauma when it comes to his sister being the regent. Catherine also Catherine doesn't know how to read or write. She's just living as a socialite at this point. But nonetheless, she's now been given the heir apparent role. Maybe he did that because it ensures that Catherine's children through him will then take the throne, so he can really weasel out his other kids, his grandkids, through Alexei. That might be it. I don't know. But it's just very fascinating to me. It very much is contradictory to how he felt about Sophia, his sister, but making Catherine, his wife, his heir to the throne, the empress. Well, around this time, too, Peter finds out that Catherine has been having an affair. She's been having an affair with Willem, Anna Mon's brother. Now, Catherine must have had some type of hold on Peter, because he doesn't really do a whole lot to Catherine. He still keeps her as his heir apparent, or maybe he's just so sick at this time he doesn't care, but he does take it out on Willem. He has Willem sentenced to death on trumped up charges. He does not want to admit that he's executing Willem because Willem slept with his wife. So he makes up this story that Willem was accepting bribes from another country, and that's why he's being executed. After Willem is executed, Peter puts Willem's head in alcohol in a jar and puts it in Catherine's apartments. So she has to look at her lover's head in a jar in her apartments for the rest of Peter's reign. Now, what's interesting is that there's a lot of folklore around this head today. And I don't know what the truth is. This is another missing head, you guys. We've talked a lot about missing heads. Oliver Cromwell, Mata Hari, Henry IV of France. This is another one. People say that Putin still has that missing head. Now, I don't know if that's urban legend. Some people say it's hidden away in some museum. That museum claims not to have it. But this is another missing head that we have of this dude. So, anyway, Peter ends up dying. He got in 720. Died on the 28th of January, 725. He was 52 years old. Catherine, his wife, takes over as empress, and she's only alive for 2 more years after this. She basically parties to death. And she dies in 1527. At that point, we go to Peter II, which was his grandson from Alexei, who died in 1730 at the age of 14. Then we go to Anna, who was one of Ivan's daughters. So I'm going to pause it there for next week, because we're going to get back into this debacle between the line of Alexei, Peter's father's first wife and second wife, because Ivan came from the first wife, Peter. So now we're still in this debacle with these grandchildren over who's going to take the throne between the maternal lines. So just know that Catherine I was the first Russian empress. She ruled for 2 years, basically partied herself to death because that's all she could do. She didn't read or write. She had no education in policies. So she just drank and partied and slept around for 2 years. I kind of don't blame her. Listen, if you had been married to Peter the Great and you had to survive, bless your heart. Oh, by the grace of God, go I. Let off that steam, girl. She passed away, and then Peter II came in and took the throne, even though that's not what Peter the Great wanted. But Peter II from Alexei's child, the executed father, took the throne, died at 14. And then Anna takes over, who's Alexei's, so Peter's cousin, Peter II's cousin, Alexei. Oh, to be a cat, it would be way more simpler. But anyway, we'll pause with that because we're going to see some really interesting controversies going on, continue to go on, a lot of blood, a lot of sadistic stuff going on between the grandchildren of Peter the Great and his half-brother Ivan for fight over the throne until we get to Catherine the Great. So that's where we'll leave it for today, you guys. But that's Peter the Great, y'all. That's not how they taught it to me in class when I was in school. We were supposed to venerate this motherfucker, but he was not a good guy. He was a psychopath and could have possibly been the Antichrist and could have possibly been the cause of the apocalypse to happen, which was the fall of Atlantis. So.
Gosh, well, he sounds like a pleasant character. So.
I hope he's not resting in peace.
He's probably living on through the bloodlines, reincarnation. They all do, actually. Yeah. Jeez, creepers. Someone was actually asking, who was that? Was it you, Carol? If that's part of the blood curses.
The bloodline curses, according to the Cassiopeians, Carol, the bloodline curses come from organic portals. Getting into soul families. And actually, I know you want Mr. Fox to come on. That might be something for him to talk about because he talks more about that. It's not about like O negative, R negative, or A negative, whatever. It's about souled people and non-souled people. And there's a difference. So just because someone's a psychopath does not mean that they are organic portals. So a lot of
but this sounds very much like organic portals to me. And although they probably would have been a mixture of two.
No, and there's so a souled person, a person with a soul, has a choice to make. They either go service to others or service for self. So a lot of these cabal people have souls just like you and me, and they've made the choice to go negative.
But they've gone to service. They've made the choice to go service to self. Absolutely,
Like Rasputin. If you guys remember, when we ended why we're talking about the Romanovs, we ended 2023 with Rasputin Schlong and his cult, and he was one of the Wall one actually said, he went negative. He chose to go negative. So that's even more sick. I know an organic portal, you can say, oh, they don't have a soul, but when somebody actually has a soul and makes that decision to murder their own son for their own selfish desires. Isn't
it interesting? Rasputin, Putin.
Yep.
You know, there's something to be said in all of this that's going on now.
Absolutely.
And I know that one of Putin's opponents was taken out on Friday, and of course, some people are saying it's Putin. Others saying he would never do that. Who knows? Who knows, guys? Wow.
Have everything hold everything with a grain of salt. You don't know this man. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't know Putin. There could be some things Putin has done that I agree with, that you agree with, but we don't know what his motives are. Because service to self people can act in service to self people can act in service to others' way if there's a manipulation involved.
Well, yeah, that's when the psychopathic tendencies come in, because they've learned to emulate completely how an empathetic person's energy or emotions work. All they do is they piggyback that, and that's
the moral of the story, right? Like, you know, in the next elections, I will probably be voting for Mr. T again, but I still keep a grain of salt when it comes to that. I will not put all my eggs in one basket. We got to wait, as my boyfriend says all the time, we got to see how this plays out, because you have to remember that these people in history are now, they're not you. Don't project yourself onto other people, right? You keep your own sovereignty. And so we just got to wait to see how it plays off. Evil people who are choosing to go service to self, the negative, the satanic path, can do things that appear to be kind for manipulation purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
Is
It's called
Putin
a psychopath.
maybe?
It's called a psychopath.
He might be. Putin might be a good guy for all I know, but I don't know him, and I don't know the full story. And so I want to sit back and wait and just see how everything plays out, because we don't know everything about every person. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Indeed. And on that note, guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen, we shall call it a day. And I shall see you not tomorrow, but Wednesday. And hopefully maybe Thursday with Caleb. Caleb has just had a family member that has crossed over to the other side. So we'll see how Caleb is doing later on during the week. But watch the space. Double dose Jesse on Wednesday. Bryce. We're on Solutions on Wednesday night again. So we will let you know what we're going to be chatting about then. It might have to do with yachting girls or something like that. Isn't that interesting? These yachting girls.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Little organic portals. I'll call them organic portals.
Yeah, I think a lot of Hollywood people, and again, I don't want to paint everyone into Hollywood bags. You know, there are some good people in Hollywood, but I think a lot of those people are, because organic portals are used by higher negative entities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
all these little chicks that are used as little sex toys. That for me is what they are. And I don't mean that as a judgment. It's really just an observation, because that's all they think about. And it's how they completely mold themselves and allow themselves to be molded to be these objects of desire. And that's what they think life is about.
It's sad.
Anyway, guys and gals.
We all got crap in our lives, but it just makes you count your blessings that you're at least you're not a yacht girl, you know. At least you weren't having to take Peter Schlong. You
know. Indeed.
So.
Okay, everybody, have a beautiful week. And before we know it, the week is over again. So we shall see you not tomorrow, but on Wednesday. God bless you all. Take good care of yourselves.
Bye, everybody.
And have a beautiful time. Cheers, guys.